Our mission is to empower youth and families in Camden County to reach their full potential through substance use prevention, education, and to create a safer community. I invite you to stop by our table after today's town hall for resources and to learn more about the coalition. We are live on YouTube today, so I'm asking that you please silence your phones. We would like to thank all of you for attending today, and a special thank you to Prosecutor Taylor and his staff for dedicating their valuable time, creating and presenting to us today on drugs and their impact on our community. So please join me in welcoming Prosecutor Taylor.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you for having me. It's never know who's out there watching, so hello to all those individuals. So this is sort of a piggyback from last year. We were talking about what is happening with regards to drugs in our community, not so much their direct impact from the healthcare industry to businesses to community, but sort of the different drug trends that are going on. So you're all familiar with it. I'm a big believer of education helps us begin to fight this good fight. I've been saying it for 22 years since I've been a prosecutor, is if drugs and alcohol didn't exist, I would be out of a job. They probably are the root cause of about 80% of the crimes in some aspect. Is almost every single domestic violence case in which we prosecute has alcohol or drugs in the background of it. Almost every single theft crime, burglaries that take place in this county are drug related. So if you start eliminating a lot of, you eliminate drugs and alcohol, once again, I'd be out of the job. My hope is to sort of talk for about 40-45 minutes, but my hope is always, whenever I chat with the community, is if there's questions that are on your mind right then and there, please ask them. I'd rather ask and answer and discuss it while we're talking about it. So otherwise, we're just going to keep moving along. It makes sense to me. My hope is to educate all of you. So before we get rocking and rolling, I want to go through some just general U.S. statistics that came out this past year of 2021. This is sort of a joint project between the DEA and the CDC. And some of these numbers are quite staggering, right? As according to most recent studies, over 37 million people in this country are currently using illicit drugs in this country. And what are we, about 350 million? So that's a huge chunk of our populace that is using it. About 13% of our populace, this is really fast, 13% are currently using or have used drugs this past month. So once again, a staggering number. Don't ask me how to break that down in millions. I'm not a mathematician. Over 50% of our population has reported that they have used illegal drugs at least once in their lifetime. So if you think about just this room, right? This half has used drugs, this half has not. Sorry, Don, the camera's not on their faces at this stage, but I'm looking at all of you. But this would be a national average, is 1 in 2 individuals used in this country some type of illicit drug. So the ultimate question is, why is our society so addicted to these controlled substances, right? It's always a big question that I've always had is, what prompts the demand in that aspect? The primary drug of choice that is illegal, and it's still illegal under the federal code and in the state of Idaho, but under the statistics, marijuana is number 1. Cocaine shortly follows thereafter. So these are the illegal drugs, right? Alcohol is a drug, but it's a legal type of drug, but marijuana currently is still the highest consumed illegal drug in our country at this stage. This is a couple years old, so we don't see what the fentanyl numbers are at this stage, because fentanyl is still quite devastating. It's really coming out. So this is just in the past 12 months, sort of the usage. Kind of breaks it down into the 2 categories of youth and adults. You can just kind of see what is being used. And, you know, I don't think COVID really helped a lot. It put people, I mean, there's a lot of mental health issues and there's depression, being closed up from society. I think you're starting to see a lot of substance abuse increase. Well, I'll show you some other statistics just again, marijuana is still number one. Opioids are slowly creeping up there, which is really scary as well. And the opioids would fall into the world of fentanyl, heroin, prescription meds, everything to that effect. Man, this controller is like brutal. So this is what individuals also indicated as first-time users. Usually everyone starts with alcohol, right? Then they usually use marijuana. These are the two predominant ones, and this would probably be the two most predominant drugs that you would see in Canyon County as well. So I think it's helpful before I jump into it. I always like to use this slide, is why do people use drugs? Most times it's the escape, it's the pleasure that the drugs give you. It's the release of this chemical in the brain called dopamine. It's this pleasure chemical, what it is, and you can kind of start seeing some of these aspects, right? Is if you're smoking a cigarette, it is releasing around 200 nanograms of this dopamine into your brain. This is this pleasure sense that's going on, right? Is the best way I've heard it, and sorry for my live audience, is a doctor indicated is in comparison to what some people have experienced, right, is you smoke, releases like this 200 nanograms, a sexual orgasm is around 250, you start going into the usage of cocaine, you're around 350, releasing, and this is this pleasure chemical, and methamphetamine is around 1,000. So you can kind of see this massive, and you have these massive spikes, and then you have these drops. And what goes up must come down, and thus you want to go back up. And that's why these drugs become so addictive so quickly in that aspect. So I think it's helpful to understand when we start going into what drugs are in our community here in Canyon County, why some are more attractive than others. A lot of it is you get a better high, better this pleasure feeling from the drugs. Right? And just in the general notion before we jump into it, drugs really mess up the brain, they mess up the body, and that's why alcohol is categorized a drug, because it's based on the same definition. Marijuana, methamphetamine, whether or not you agree or disagree, I'm not here about politics, based on its definition, if it modifies and impacts the brain in a certain way, that's why it's called a drug, right? So, with that, let's move into what is going on in the good old 2C, since that's what our coalition is about. Well, I guess I forgot about this. Almost all of our drugs, 99%, 98%, are coming from Mexico. So, once again, I'm not going to go into politics and borders and all that aspects. I'll let the pundits deal with that. The two primary cartels that we interact with in criminal justice are the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation. So these two individuals are they're fighting right now. So you'll see a lot of the cartel wars, but these are the two primary distributors of all the drugs that we're seeing in our community. And the cartels have exploded. The ramifications of the legalization of marijuana throughout basically the whole western part, most of the country at this stage, is there was this massive, right, it's all economics, is there's this massive takeaway of your income from marijuana, legal marijuana. Now it's become legalized, so the cartels need to keep their money and income stream, so thus now you're seeing the methamphetamine on the rise, the fentanyl on the rise, because they have to offset, right? You got to adapt your business plan in order to keep the money rolling. And since marijuana money streams were dwindling, they had to find new products. So there's always, right, ripple effects by every decision that's made. It's estimated, as of I think last year, the cartels were pulling in anywhere around $18 to $36 billion a year. So once again, it's all economics, basic supply, demand. If there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. And so when you're really basing it down onto this, it is a huge money-making industry, and thus they want to continue making their money, and they don't want anyone to get in the way of making the money. Thus, they use violence to deal with that. That's a different topic for a different day. So what's in Canyon County? Methamphetamine in Canyon County is still king. It is still the most predominant drug outside of marijuana that we deal with. It is from last year, it is still increasing. It's increasing even more because the cost of methamphetamine has dropped. Thus, it's more affordable to the consumer, is what we're seeing. I mean, does anyone watch Breaking Bad? Right? The development and manufacturing of methamphetamine, right, as Hollywood has taken on a lot of these drugs, and there's movies or television shows on most of these things. But what we did really well as a state and as a country, this was about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we started fighting the good fight of removing a lot of the ingredients. These are the ingredients of what is made of methamphetamine. Pseudoephedrine was the primary aspect. When that was removed from shelves in pharmacies or the Walgreens, the Rite Aids, it really put a huge stop on the meth labs that we were dealing with 15 years ago. So now, once again, all the methamphetamine is being made in Mexico, and thus it is being trafficked into our country. So we don't see the meth labs anymore because we have shut down, but this is what's going in people's bodies. Right? When you really look at it, once it starts to crystallize, you start doing it, you got pseudoephedrine, you got acetone, acids, right? I mean, it's pretty nasty stuff that people are smoking, stored, and injected into their bodies. Which, once again, from my health professionals, causes a huge public health issue too. And you don't see all the ramifications and the impact that drugs have, right? As people starting to use meth, you have a burden on the healthcare industry, you have a burden on the businesses. Right? As individuals start missing jobs, we can't find any employees in this country, it seems like, and you have all these issues. So this is 32 grams of methamphetamine that was seized here in Canyon County, and 0.2 grams of this is a user amount. So just this bag right here, you have 160 possible user amounts, just in this small little bag of methamphetamine, right? Going around, and 32 grams, a couple $100 of usage of getting those massive highs. That dopamine release is going down, and then they're using it again. So they're injecting all this stuff into their body day in, day out. This is what it looks like for those, I mean, you read about, you see about it, but this is what is being taken off the streets here in Canyon County, Idaho. This was Sinaloa cartel methamphetamine. This is 2 kilograms. Methamphetamine. So you think 32 grams is 160 user amounts? Imagine how many people, if this gets released into our community, and it'll be chopped up, spliced up. This is about $30,000 worth of drugs. So it doesn't make the cartels happy when it sees this aspect. This thing is super sensitive. The other picture is just this picture in a different angle. So this is why we call it crystal methamphetamine. It looks like a giant crystal if we were to go spelunking or something to that effect. That's where it gets its terminology name. But this is, right, as you're chipping it off, breaking it down, selling it, this is worth a lot of money to those cartels, and they're building those blocks of everything. So once again, just more bags of it. This was a recent seizure. This is the back of a seat. The case, all these photos are cases that are adjudicated just for our Facebook Live audience. But this is 27 pounds of methamphetamine that was hidden in the back of the seat. The drug dog, I believe, alerted on the car, and then once the officer started searching it here in Canyon County, right, 27 pounds, that's a huge haul. And we are in what is referred to as a designated HIDTA region, a high-intensity drug trafficking area. So Canyon County and Eastern Oregon, Malheur County, we make up this region, this HIDTA region. It goes into Ada County, all the way down to Elmore. Is we are like a perfect geographical location for the distribution of drugs, basically to the whole Northwest into Colorado, Wyoming, the Dakotas. Everything's coming up through Arizona, Nevada, California, and then we basically become the hub, splitting everything off. So we see a lot of these large quantities. Some of it stays in our community, others are just passing by in that aspect. So, but once again, each one of these bags is a pound of methamphetamine, crystal methamphetamine. So, this is what's in your community in that kind of scary, isn't it? So then you had to start being inventive. This was a meth that was in the bottom of the WD-40 can. So you start looking, right, as people try to hide all this stuff in very unique and weird places, and you have to be looking for it. So those that are interacting with the public, it's not like somebody's just going to leave it on their table, although they do that at times. But, right, when those spidey senses go off, right, you don't know where it's at. It could be in any possible location. And, right, the smaller it is, the easier it is to conceal. So, questions with regards to methamphetamine? What's going on in our community? Usually with methamphetamine, you usually find weapons, right? Once again, if you're trafficking the drugs, you got to protect the drugs and thus the monetary income that comes with the drugs. So usually weapons are found. These are all weapons that were discovered in Canyon County alongside with this methamphetamine. You'll start going into the community, right? You start seeing people that are high on methamphetamine. This is from Tampa. This lady was high on methamphetamine, was disturbing the peace. Officers had to try to detain this lady. She became very violent and aggressive towards them. But once this chemical is in your body, it takes over the brain, takes over other aspects, and people do really weird things when they're high on the methamphetamine in this aspect. And once again, you start getting the acetone. This is what happens, meth mouth, right? Once again, you get acetone and everything else. It starts eating your body from the inside. This is probably one of the most famous photos. This is a gal that, these are all of her booking photos. This is when she first started using meth, and this is her progression. Each one of these were a booking photo of her being arrested. And then she ultimately dies at the age of 38 as methamphetamine basically shut down the whole body and all the things. But this is what methamphetamine does. It's one of those things is if somebody's using methamphetamine, you can start, it starts having a distinct smell. It's kind of like when somebody smokes a marijuana joint, it has that distinct smell. You'll see it coming from the pores, or you'll smell it coming from the pores, especially somebody that's been using it quite heavily. But this is what, it's a very sad, very devastating drug. And then once again, you're seeing the medical profession being hit, families being devastated by it, because people want this high, this is dopamine. And when it comes down, it's crashing so hard that they need that next hit. And it's just this massive up and down. And they can't get it fast enough. And that's what's super scary, and thus a lot of other crimes stem from this addiction to methamphetamine. But it is the most common drug that we deal with in Canyon County on our felony level, and it is has the most ripple effects, I think, in our community at this stage. So questions? That positive note? Comments, thoughts? Okay. Now we'll move on to really the big topic of the world, right? The opioid pandemic that we are dealing with as a country. So opioids come in a large variety of aspects, from the opium, heroin, morphine, to now fentanyl. With regards to a lot of prescription medications, jump into this particular aspect. Prescription medications, we had this huge issue over the past decade of massive prescription abuse taking place. The country, I think, has done a really good job in the world of the prescription meds abuse, and thus we have seen a massive decrease in the actual use of prescription medications that we're dealing with, which is a good thing. I think physicians, hospitals, everyone is on the same page now for the most part. We're beating to the same drum on this. It also doesn't help that pills were fairly inexpensive a few years ago, and now because the demand for oxycodone, hydrocodone, all of these, it's harder to come by, and thus basic economics has driven the price up. So now what was maybe a $30 pill is now an $80 pill. Once again, to get that high, that starts becoming quite cost prohibitive, and thus we're going to see we're moving on to more powerful opioids in that aspect. So for Idaho, if you were to say that we still have some prescription medication abuse that's going on, hydrocodone is our predominant one in the state of Idaho. These are, right, they're just these prescription pills that all of us have probably seen. A lot of times it was from surgeries that people got addicted. It's a lot of common stories that you hear in that aspect. So, once again, they were pretty readily available. I think this is where the coalition and other entities have done a good job of just the basic awareness, right? Is lock up your medicine cabinets. You got pill disposal bags back there. If you have old pills, get rid of them. And I think we as a society have addressed that issue quite well, so a lot of these numbers are starting to decrease as well. But as a rise from the prescription pills, we saw a massive increase to heroin over the last 3 to 4 years. And this past year, heroin has even been leveling off, and we'll see that's a result because the fentanyl is out of control. So it's this natural progression, right? As the opioids gave you this type of a high, the heroin's giving you this much of a high, and now we're moving on to the fentanyl, which we will see is even higher, right? It is what and you get more sort of proverbial bang for your buck. But heroin use around the whole country is almost tripled. Once again, this is the natural progression from pills to the heroin. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching this video. I think every single high school kid should have to watch this video. It's about how these kids become addicted to heroin. They're all really good kids in high school, and how this drug just basically consumes their life. And it's not a good video for the faint of heart. It's a very graphic video in that aspect. But I think Hollywood does a very good portray of what heroin does to an individual. What's scary is our surrounding states, at least to the west. Oregon a couple years ago decriminalized user amounts of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, user amounts. Seattle has now facilities in which you can shoot up heroin. They'll provide you with the clean needles. The logic and the theory is if we bring them to a safe, clean environment, at least it's being done safely. They're going to use anyway, so we might as well do it and help administer it in that aspect. Make sure people aren't overdosing it and anything. Yes, sir.
So how are these different than doesn't Idaho have a needle exchange program, clean needle exchange program or something?
Idaho may have a clean needle exchange where you're exchanging the actual needles, but they're not allowing, here is it is a government-funded facility in which, hey, you come in, we're giving you everything, and we're going to watch you shoot up right in front of us. Idaho doesn't allow for that. So, good question. Any other questions? You broke the ice. I appreciate it. Any other questions? So heroin is plateaued, though, for us in that aspect, right? So this is in its powder form, becomes liquefied. You'll see a lot of the needle track marks on people's arms. This is what you typically find in this aspect, right? This is what black tar heroin looks like here. We see in Canyon County, a little bigger picture of it. This would be about 740 user amounts, very small quantities of the heroin that's being used. Edit that from Facebook. So this is once again, right, is I think the booking photos kind of show you, this is 4 different people, but these are people that hadn't really started using heroin that begin to use it, and this is their progression. And these are all booking photos, right? So you can start seeing how these drugs start to just destroy one's body in that aspect. Each one of these piles is 10 packets of user amounts of heroin. Yes, ma'am?
What is heroin made out of as far as?
Yep, the poppy, the opium.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yep, good question. So, yeah, I think the majority of the heroin that is produced, and don't hold me to this, I think 90% 90% of it comes from like Central Asia, Afghanistan, that area, the poppies and that. And then it's routed typically through China to Mexico and then up, is what it typically goes. That's the typical path. But, right, so this is a seizure here in Caldwell. And each one of these, right, is 10 packets, and each packet is a user, right, amount is, and once again, you can get a pill for $30 or up to $80 now, and you can get a user amount of heroin for $10 to $20. What are you going to go to, right? Once again, basic economics, supply demand. Whereas, hey, I can get potentially 8 user amounts of heroin for the same cost of 1 pill. What is the addict going to go to? And you're getting that bigger high with the heroin. Right? So this is what a brick of black tar heroin looks like. Here seized by our narcotics unit. And I don't know if you can see, there's a whole bunch of little white specks on this. You know what that is? Fentanyl? That's fentanyl. It's starting to be laced. This was an early offset, small user amount of fentanyl that is starting to be put into the actual heroin. Now you start seeing it more in the powder form of heroin. You're going to be able to do a lot more chopping up of the fentanyl into it. Once again, this would be, so now we move on to what I think is really the current big pandemic in the country. Is fentanyl is out of control in the United States. And in Canyon County is no exception. It's drastically increasing. Law enforcement is doing its best to address the issue, but it is becoming so abundant and so much of it's coming in. And a lot of it looks like, right, an oxycodone pill or hydrocodone pills, right? This would be fentanyl in its legal form over here in these patches. Gosh darn it. I'm ready to play get this. So fentanyl, once again, it's a synthetic opioid, meaning that it is manufactured and chemically versus the true opioid coming from the poppy plant. Opium in that aspect would be a true opioid versus being chemically created opioid. Does that make sense? When we're talking about it being a synthetic in that aspect. It's very similar to morphine. If anyone's had a morphine shot, right? It is about 50 times more powerful than that morphine shot. If anyone's had a major life surgery or a major pain or injury, it's very likely that the hospital may have given morphine to you to ease the pain in that aspect. Times that by 50. So, once again, on the street, sometimes it becomes very difficult to determine what the difference is, right? Which one's oxycodone, which one's methamphetamine? This is the, not the methamphetamine, the fentanyl. This is the methamphetamine or fentanyl pills, right? So, once again, almost all of the fentanyl that we are dealing with in Canyon County is manufactured in China. And then almost all of it is routed through Mexico, and then the cartels are distributing it. So the cartels, very few cartels are actually even manufacturing the fentanyl. They're getting it from Asia primarily. Unlike the majority of the cartels manufacturing methamphetamine, here China is doing the predominant aspect of fentanyl production that we are interacting with. So these are pills in which our local law enforcement has seized here in Canyon County. Right? Each one of these is a fentanyl pill, and each one could be a lethal dose in that aspect.
Fentanyl is a potent synthetic opioid commonly prescribed for pain relief. In its legally prescribed form, fentanyl is generally in a patch or lollipop. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, fentanyl is approximately 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. In its illicit form, fentanyl is generally a white powder that can be used orally, smoked, snorted, or injected. Because it is cheap, incredibly potent, and easily obtained from countries like China, drug cartels are increasingly mixing fentanyl with heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and even spice. It is also increasingly being found in counterfeit prescription pills.
It's very rare now for us to find a controlled substance that does not have some traces of fentanyl in it. And once again, think of it from a business optics point of view. Is the way I always think of it is, okay, you can go to John and buy a user amount of heroin and get a high. Or you can go to Bob, buy a user amount of heroin that's mixed with fentanyl that's going to give you even more of a high. Which one are you going to go to if they're the same price, right? So the fentanyl gives that extra sort of boost, one would say, in that aspect.
Fentanyl is a potent.
Okay. So we, this past year, have surpassed 100,000 deaths, overdose, in the U.S. based on the opioid, primarily the fentanyl. And what we are seeing now is last year when I came and chatted with you, is about 1 out of every 4 pills. Now we're up to about 1 out of every 1.5 pills is a lethal dose. So you're looking at that bag, it's like Russian roulette, right? It is, here's 4 pills, which one are you going to take? One of them is going to cause you to overdose. And that's what we're dealing with, is we're seeing this massive increase of overdose that is going on. Here is a great imagery, is these are overdose amounts of each of these drugs, right? This would be a user amount of heroin, which is about 20 milligrams. If you consume 20 milligrams, you're more likely than not to overdose and die, right? Fentanyl, you're at 2 milligrams, and now we haven't seen a lot of it. It's been here, but we have this carfentanil, which is primarily used to take down like elephants, is 0.02. So once fentanyl in the substance, right, I equate it to, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's one I think a lot of people understand is, if you've never drank alcohol in your life, and you were to drink a 5th of Jack Daniels for the first time ever, you're probably toast, right? You're ending up at St. Luke's in that aspect. What typically happens, right, is you start off with your first hams. Hey, I like this little buzz of the hams, right? But now after drinking 1 hams, here and there, I'm not getting that same buzz in effect. So now I got to move on to 2 hams, right? Then I'm going to move on eventually to a 6-pack. And then you're going to a case. Now you're not getting the same effect of that case. Now you're starting to move to the Jack Daniels. And now when you drink that 5th of Jack, your body has created this tolerance. The drugs are no different, right? As once your body starts to maintain a tolerance to some of these drugs, I can easily envision that once we start getting a tolerance level to the heroin and the fentanyl, not that you can get a full tolerance because it's going to overdose anyway, they're going to start moving on to something even more powerful because it keeps the clients coming back for more. And this or that. And once again, it's basic economics, right? But this was just fairly recent here in Kane County. This is 15,000 of these pills that were seized of fentanyl in our community. Little old Canyon County, Idaho, right? 15,000. Somebody do the math for me. We'll just stick with the 1 out of the 4. How many user and possible deaths could you have in Canyon County, right? That's what's scary about this particular drug. This is what the carfentanil looks like here. And it's, the really scary stuff is when this stuff goes airborne and you inhale it, and you're not ready for it, you could overdose from it as well. I mean, the sheriff's office has had a couple of jail deputies as they're booking people in. They find some of this fentanyl powder, it becomes airborne, they're rushed to the hospital because they're having symptoms from being exposed to the fentanyl at this stage. This is why we've purchased new scanners and everything. I mean, it's kind of scary what law enforcement, first responders are having to interact with.
They don't even have to inhale it. We actually were at the farmer's market, and one of the deputies said that he had, during a pat down, had just touched it.
Yep.
And
It gets absorbed through the skin. That's exactly right. I mean, it's really scary stuff. right? This is nationwide. We are approaching, last year, over 10 million fentanyl pills that have been seized in this country. It has just skyrocketed. What we saw just a couple years ago, yeah, fentanyl existed, but it wasn't the concern that it is today in our interaction with it. This is, you probably saw on the national news, this is what, you haven't seen it in Canyon County yet, but it's nationwide. This is called rainbow candy. This is what fentanyls look like. There was over 15,000 pills that were seized that were in Skittles packages and Nerds boxes, everything to that effect. That's why you always go with the full-size candy bar for Halloween. You do not go with the Nerds or the Skittles, right? But this is what's scary. This is how they are trafficking the fentanyl pills, right? So, right, this is where the paranoia of parents and trick-or-treating, especially right around the corner that's coming around. So, this is, I was mentioning, we have this HIDA region. This is our most recent statistics. Is last year, we seized 1.5 million fentanyl pills. This is just eastern Oregon and southern Idaho, basically down to Mountain Home. 1.5 million pills, that's not even the rest of the state. That, from the previous year, I guarantee you we're going to surpass this year in this region. But from 01 to 2020, that's a 51% increase of fentanyl. It's a 137% increase from 2 years ago. Thus, the fentanyl is invading our local community here in Canyon County, and it is one that the coalition, this would be a great mantra to really start targeting, is just fentanyl awareness, what to do, what to look for, being cognizant of it. It's very, and it's a super dangerous drug. This is, once again, opioid overdose emergency departments, right, as you just see. It just keeps increasing. So you're seeing a lot more. But what is also happening, so there is drugs called, like Narcan is what every officer carries now with them. It's in every jail. There's some states and cities, I think like Philadelphia, you can go to the public library and get free Narcan with you. Narcan is fairly easily accessible. So what you will do is me and a buddy are going to use our fentanyl together. I'm going to use the fentanyl, so if I get a bad pill, my buddy's going to revive me with this Narcan. So once it's Narcan, it's basically counteracts the opioid, basically just brings you back to life. So it's, has anyone seen Pulp Fiction? Right? It's like when they stick the needle in the heart and she's resuscitated right there, that's what Narcan basically does. Just brings them back to life like this. As they overdose, and so now you have these individuals and addicts in which we talk to, it's the ultimate high for them to go to the overdose state and then to be revived back to life by their buddies. So you're putting a lot of faith in your friend that they're going to revive you. But every first responder now in Canyon County, every officer carries Narcan with them. And we've saved a lot of lives because you quickly administer this, you save the person's life in that aspect. So, and you're starting to see states now that will authorize free Narcan to everyone because once again, we're trying to combat so people don't overdose and die as well. So cocaine, it's here. It hasn't increased, hasn't decreased. It's sort of a status quo drug. It's been a status quo drug for about 20 years since I've been here. It is, cocaine is, maybe it's the wrong terminology, but it's the rich man's drug. It's very, very expensive, and you see cocaine in the very affluent individuals, whereas methamphetamine and fentanyl are very inexpensive, and thus, if you don't have a lot of money, that's where you go to, are these other drugs. So cocaine has really stayed fairly consistent. Typically, it's in its powder form. This is some cocaine that was seized here in Caldwell. So it's nothing, it's not a, it's there, but it's not the same level of concern as the methamphetamine and fentanyl that's in our community at this stage. The one that's starting to scare us a little bit is this has really gone down over the last 2 to 3 years, but we've seen a massive spike of bath salts coming back. And I don't know why it is, because bath salts are still very expensive. But these are this mixture of a whole bunch of chemicals that originally derives from this cot plant in Africa, but then you get all the synthetic components added into it. It looks like if you were to take a nice hot bath, you were to put aromatic bath salts into it, that's what they look like. That's where they get their terminology of a bath salt. But it is an illegal drug. In Idaho, it's only a misdemeanor at this stage because the chemical compounds change so quickly that we cannot continue to, we can't keep up with the categorization of it. All they do is change one little chemical component of it, and then it's no longer prohibited under our state statute. Is the way these bath salts work versus cocaine. It's cocaine. You can't really modify it, otherwise it's no longer cocaine. So, but bath salts are really easy to get. A lot of people are purchasing these just off the internet and UPS or the Amazon man. I don't think you can get it on Amazon. But the UPS guy just delivers it to your door. And no one knows it better. This is what it kind of looks like in its aspect. It's one of my favorite ones. It's the Charlie Sheen bath powder in this aspect. But we had a guy, this was about 1.5 years ago, and to kind of show you what it is it was here in Caldwell. He was so high on bath salts, it's kind of like almost impacts the body like PCP is. You don't feel anything. You can get hit with a police baton, get your leg broken, you don't even feel it. It just messes up the brain. But he went full, basically, Hannibal Lecter on another individual and started eating at his face, taking chunks out of his cheek and stuff. And this is what this stuff does. So we're starting to see more and more arrests on this. Unfortunately, they're only misdemeanors in the state of Idaho, so there's very limited we can do. But, you can start seeing these little bath salt packages and they're being picked up.
Is it, are you guys finding that this too is being laced with fentanyl?
I haven't seen any of the bath salts laced with fentanyl. Knock on wood yet. Not in Canyon County. It is happening around the rest of the country. We have not seen any here. So, because if it's laced with fentanyl, then it elevates it up to our felony level, so we haven't had one of those yet. So the last drug I'm going to talk about is marijuana. It's there. It's still in the state of Idaho. Whether, once again, I don't know what people's political hates are. It's still legal in Idaho, so we're an island of itself. Every state around us basically has legalized it in some form, as well as our northern brethren of Canada has legalized it. But in Idaho, I really consider it's the same. It's the same about user amounts. It's and it's really not the joints, right? You see the joints. It's they may get a ticket for it, but that's about all they get. Is they're getting court costs, fines. I think what is being said, sort of in some public squares, that everyone's going. Our jails are full with people with marijuana charges or prison on marijuana charges. I think it's a false statement. Most of our drug-related offenses are the methamphetamine and fentanyl that we're dealing with. The marijuana is there. With that said, this is probably the predominant drug now that you are seeing in our public school systems from Nampa, Caldwell. I'm looking at my audience right here. Most of you are probably like me back in the days when we were in public school. It was whether or not somebody was going to get caught with a can of beer, right? That is now elevated to the world of methamphetamine. Other drugs are there, not methamphetamine, marijuana, but it is the marijuana that is the most predominant individuals that we're seeing coming into the juvenile justice system is the marijuana, if you're just talking about drugs. So this was most recent Idaho statistics is 12% of basically our high school kids have used marijuana. Junior high and high school kids have used marijuana this past year. 9,000 of them have indicated that they used marijuana the previous month. That's a lot of kids in the state of Idaho that have admitted to using marijuana. It's very readily available, especially if you live in Caldwell, Idaho. It's a 30-minute drive to go get That's state of Idaho. That's all state of Idaho, and I can get you, the state, I can email it to, the coalition of the state statistics.
Do you have the numbers for Canyon County?
I do not have for Canyon County. It is, I think it's the state drug coalition that gathered it from the statewide. So I'm sure it's a statistic in which they pulled some and then extrapolated the numbers.
So Idaho Healthy Youth Survey.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. I can tell you from my office, if a kid comes into the juvenile justice system for a drug charge, it's almost always marijuana. So, in that
So that
aspect.
statistic is what they self-report.
Yeah, this is a self-reporting, yep. So, but I would agree that the primary drug of choice for high school and junior high kids outside of alcohol would be marijuana. So in the state of Idaho, it just changed, I think in this last legislative session, that tobacco now is illegal until you're 21 as well. It used to be 18 forever, and then the state just changed it as of July, so you can't have tobacco products until you're 21 as well.
And that's just in Idaho.
Just in Idaho, yeah.
No, that's actually nationwide now.
Yeah, I don't know.
We were the last state to jump on
There
the
you go.
bandwagon. President Trump, started the legislation, but every state had to kind of jump on with
If you want to get federal
what the
dollars.
federal standards were, and we were the last state to do it.
We were the holdout.
That includes vape products too.
Yep. So, if anyone has gone over to Oregon, this is what it looks like, right? These are cannabis shops, right? Gives you the different products that are going on. So, I mean, they're very nice stores. Hey, it's legal, so they're gonna run a business in every aspect. So, it is, I mean, this is just, I just grabbed this from one of their web pages to kind of give you an idea, right? Hey, here's this particular marijuana, it's 50% off for September, right? This is, I just pulled this a couple days ago, right? Peg does, right? Rolling papers, you can get for $1. They've had over 260,000 orders just from this one cannabis shop in Ontario, right? 65,000 customers. And if all of you were to go to Wikipedia, I don't think the city of Ontario has 65,000 people. So, majority of the customers, they're all Idaho plates that are in the parking lot in that aspect, so, right? So, but, hey, that's the state of Oregon's prerogative, and that's what they have done, but it is everywhere. And that's why I think it is much more predominant. I think the social stigma of it is not what it was 10 years ago, so kiddos that are in high school probably don't see this as bad as a fentanyl or methamphetamine just based on the national dialogue that has been taking place. You have celebrities that are lighting up joints on late night television shows, right? So there's a whole different cultural change in that aspect. But, you know, when you start seizing 202 grams of marijuana, you know, if it takes 0.32 grams on average to roll a joint, that equates to almost 632 joints just in this bag alone. So that's, you're smoking 2 joints a day for the entire year. That's a lot of marijuana, right? That's almost Snoop Dogg style. And so you start going, is this truly a user amount, or are you trying to sell it now?
What's the likelihood there would be fentanyl, that it would be laced with fentanyl?
You're not seeing a lot of fentanyl in the world of marijuana at this stage, and I would attribute that, although there's still a black market for marijuana, it's not as big now because it's so readily available, and these businesses will go under if they start lacing it with fentanyl. And I think that is the primary reason why we haven't seen it. Not to say that every single marijuana seizure we had doesn't have fentanyl in it, but the majority of them do not. It's easier to mix fentanyl, you think of it, right? It's easier to mix it into the powders, the heroin, the cocaines, even the meth that it gets into. So, right, I mean, this was like 120 some pounds of marijuana that was seized by ISP. So, yeah, this is a little more than just somebody smoking up a joint or something to that effect. So, I'm gonna go through this. This is one of the challenges that, right, marijuana has a distinct odor. So if you've ever been around somebody that smoked a joint, or you've gone to Denver, you know what marijuana smells like, right? It has this very, maybe the term that everyone says, it's got this skunk-like odor. Maybe some people like it. It's what it smells like to me. Now we're getting into the oils and the extracts. It doesn't have that same smell. And now we're talking about the vaping that is going on. And so these high school kids that were starting to vape, they may be using marijuana, and that constitutes as marijuana use. But you have no clue, because they're not outside in the parking lot smoking a joint or doing a bong. They're doing it in some other aspect, right? So you start making these extracts. You can have cupcakes, right? So now you're moving away from a joint that's anywhere from 14 to 18% THC to marijuana extracts that can be anywhere all the way up to like 97, 98% THC, right? That's what's scary. You start getting gummy bears, right? It's candy bars. I think I told you guys this last year. This is the lawyer nerd in me. If anyone is really fascinated with legal cases that are going on, this is becoming a huge, hotly contested, is all these product liability suits. Like Nestle and Butterfinger have sued certain companies for doing write-offs. So there's this huge legal battle that's going around this country for different products that people are thinking they're going to be clever with regards to their product names.
You notice what's similar between that last slide and the one with the rainbow fentanyl? Is they're putting it, they're packaging it in like candy form. They're trying-
Absolutely.
Who are they really reaching when they're
Yeah.
putting it in candy form? Like gummy bears. When was the last time any of us here went and grabbed like gummy bears?
I just grabbed some gummy bears from my picking coordinators in my office, and I'm thinking, man, I have a photo of this. Hey, I'm doing good today, folks. Yes, ma'am.
And what we're seeing in the schools
Yep.
also is that kids can just buy these online. And all they have to do is click a box saying
Yep.
I'm over 18.
Yep.
And then they just buy them and have them shipped to
Yep.
their house. or their friend's
UPS
house.
person, and no one would know the difference, right? You get a bag of gummies, right? And here it is.
We also, last summer, or the summer before, we had a doctor from Colorado, a product that was Nerd candy ropes. And on one side, it had certain level of THC on it. You flipped it around, it had a completely different reading. And so
Yep.
you can't even get
Nope.
a correct parameter of how much of the drug you're actually putting into your body.
That's exactly right. And once again, I go back to the same aspect is, if you haven't built a tolerance and threshold, and you're experimenting with a gummy bear that's 99% THC, that could have catastrophic effects on you that you don't realize. So, and then the vaping, right, is you don't know, because it could have different smells to it, added to it, but you could have the THCs in these vape pens, and you would never know it either. So those are other aspects, but from a volume, it's basically stayed the same. We're not seeing any massive increase to it. The same amount are using that have been using it. And then, so what you typically get, right, is people say, well, you don't find all these together. Well, that's not really the case. You usually find a lot of these always together. And this is just one example of an illustration, right? Is here's your weapon, right? You got your heroin needles, you got your methamphetamine, you got your black tar heroin, you got your marijuana, you got your paraphernalia. This is just off of one person, right? And this is what we typically see, is when I get a report, it's not just, hey, they had a thing of methamphetamine. It's usually paraphernalia, there's some other drugs. So you're seeing individuals utilizing multiple drugs at the same time. So this is what the current economics are for drugs in Canyon County. I try to update this at least once a year. This is the going rates. People always ask, right? Is if you were to get some illegal marijuana, as I showed you on the web page, depends on the different type of marijuana, the quality of marijuana, the level of THC. It can range anywhere from $350 to almost $500 for marijuana. And I try to keep it all the same for the gram. Whereas you have the illegal marijuana, you can still get it on the black market, and it's all black market in Idaho, right? Because it's not legal to buy here. But it's usually around $400. That way you don't have to pay taxes either in that aspect. And most of them, no one ever gets the drug stamp that's required under Idaho state law. So, methamphetamine, about an ounce. Last year was anywhere around $600 to $700, so it's dropped quite a bit. Once again, there's a massive quantity of methamphetamine. So if you want to start buying in bulk, start getting into kilos and pounds, you get, right, a little price reduction, so to speak, right? Then your bath salts, once again, they're super duper expensive, but they're really, really easy to get if you really know what you're doing. Cocaine, once again, right, is, hey, it's going to cost me $1,400 for an ounce of coke or $400 for methamphetamine. What is the majority of the people going to go to, right? The meth, which is why cocaine is sort of the status quo, and it's not as many people use it. It's more of a rich person's drug. Heroin, it's actually gone up just a tad. It was about $10 a point user amount last year. It's gone up about $20 this past year. So, which is why then people now are moving to fentanyl, which is anywhere from $15 to $35 versus your oxycodone pills are 10 to 25, but fentanyl is going to give you more of a bang for the buck. So that's what the going rates are in Canyon County. And just based solely on the amounts is why methamphetamine and fentanyl are our two prominent increases of this past year. Once again, I know no one likes to listen to it. It's all economics. And this is where I would challenge the coalition is, rather than always targeting the supply, that's my job, that's law enforcement's job, but why are we such an addictive society? Why are we consuming the majority of the world's illegal narcotics? It's a billion-dollar question, really, in a certain aspect, is how do you start addressing the demand, especially at our younger kids and age? What is prompting them to want to jump into these drugs? Now, right, I don't know the answer. If I knew the answer, I'd be out of a job. So, this is just once more, this is Canyon County, this is my office. This is just adults, this is not juveniles. These are our felony drug charges. I don't have all my numbers for 2022 since we still have a little bit. But we saw the most drug charges. These are felony drug cases coming into our office of law enforcement. Drugs are super prevalent in Canyon County. So there's no hiding it at this stage. They're there. Methamphetamine and fentanyl make up the vast majority of those felony cases. Our drug trafficking, so these are individuals that have large enough quantities that would be considered that they are trying to sell and deliver. And what's fascinating in the state of Idaho, fentanyl does not fall into the trafficking statutes or delivery statutes. So you can have 100 pounds of fentanyl and still just possession of fentanyl versus 100 pounds of cocaine or methamphetamine would be trafficking drugs. Why is that? Talk to your state legislatures. I just can only inform what they give me. So, but that's sort of where we're at as a community. It impacts us all. It's like I said, I think last year is a different topic is just, I think it'd be great to have just a panel of individuals, somebody from the healthcare industry. How does it impact the healthcare, the drugs? I know it does. It impacts the ERs, the treatment. How many millions of dollars are taken and diverted to dealing with the drugs? Employment components, right, is people that are operating heavy machinery that shouldn't be operating heavy machinery. People that can't come to work and then you lose the work productivity. All these things you don't start thinking about start having these impacts because of these drugs in our community. People's houses are being burglarized, right? Porch pirates. Everyone has that awesome experience. I had it last year. It's awesome. But I found the guy. That's what the Ring camera does, so. But at the same token, and you know what's the best, I divert, is, God bless him, he stole a Bible, that's what was in my package. So that's like God coming down and saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. So that's the best aspect. But it impacts our society and impacts the environment, impacts everything, right? It's needles on the streets, what's being put down sewer systems. You know, you throw methamphetamine or something, flushing it down the toilet, it has an impact on our waters. And you don't think about that kind of stuff, but it does. It has every impact on every aspect of our society, and we as a community have to rectify it. 90% of these individuals are not bad human beings. And I know I'm a prosecutor, and that's my job, is to hold people accountable. It's people that become addicted and let these drugs control their life. And how do we as a society go, yeah, how do we get them not even want to be addicted and not wanting that demand? Why is life so bad that you need to jump into this world? And I think that's the big question that we as a collective will have to deal with. So, but I'm at my time. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, inquiries, anything? Yes, ma'am.
So, on Sunday, we ran into a lady while we were picking up pizza for a birthday party, and she was obviously on something and, screaming and yelling and banging on our vehicle window and then trying to get into businesses and stuff. So what happens to a person like that when you call in and, you know, someone comes out or whatever? Do they get arrested? Do they go to treatment? I mean, what's the process with that? Or do they just go back out on the street or?
It's a great question. Yes, all of the above. It depends. This is the lawyer in me, right? Is I would need more information on that. Is if the individual is solely mental health issues, that is high on methamphetamine, what typically happens is law enforcement will do their best. This is where the hospitals come in, and the hospitals don't like it sometimes. But it is, you're doing basically a 24-hour hold on this person to get them detoxed and clean. Because the jail's not the place for it necessarily. The jail doesn't have the medical capabilities to treat every person that's coming in. Is it just, now, do they have drugs on them? That's a different aspect, is when they take them to the hospital and they search them and they find meth on them, then they probably go to the jail in that aspect, and they're detoxing probably a little harder than they would at the hospitals. Now, Canyon County doesn't have, just the practical aspect is we don't have the jail facilities to hold every single one of these individuals. So to your latter part, a lot of people are going into the system very quickly. The system does not do a very good job from the time that you're arrested to the time that you're adjudicated to address those issues. We're really good before you get arrested to try to get treatment, and I think we're pretty good after you're convicted of getting you to treatments. In between, while you're waiting that 3 to 4 months, people aren't getting treated, and that's a challenge. Other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Is there anything that is either in place or being developed across the county for schools with school resource officers and bringing education and trying to do more proactive and preventative rather than, I know that by the time they get usually to that level, it's more reacting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in place where, especially with the fentanyl, the increase in fentanyl?
My understanding is that the 2C Coalition, this is going to be a topic of your agenda to start working towards the schools. School resource officers are phenomenal, and I wish every single school had one. And every high school in the county, I think, has one, but not every grade school. I think it would be very valuable. I don't know the answer of what specific programs that those agencies are implementing. I know my office and my deputies will maybe go once a year, every other year to a certain school, and we'll talk to one class, but it's not a full auditorium. We'll talk about a wide array, but not solely on drugs. So I don't know what law enforcement agencies specifically, it's not like back in the 80s where we had the drug-free zones, where you had, right, just say no to drugs. I think it was it's a catchy phrase, but I don't think that has been pushed as hard. But but I could be wrong.
We did just have, the 2CTSD did just have Stephen Hill, a nationwide substance abuse prevention speaker, come out and speak to the student body at Jefferson Middle School. And they will be working with Idaho Drug Free Youth that has a peer mentor program that they put on. So, and we do have opportunities, like I do have an opportunity for another speaker that's coming out to speak to youth, I think November 3rd, I believe. So if there's any schools that are interested, we'd love to bring a speaker out and then hook you up with the Idaho Drug Free Youth peer mentorship program. What it does is it starts a conversation with bring a speaker, and then we continue to work on those conversations throughout the school year with the school and Idaho Drug Free Youth.
I would also recommend possibly having the 2C Coalition and the Region 3 Behavioral Health Board team up.
I
The
think
Region 3 Behavioral Health Board has a Children's Mental Health Subcommittee that meets the last Wednesday of every month. And there are grant opportunities often that are just overlooked or not applied for, where there could be funding that are diverted to the schools to help with programs such as this.
that's a brilliant idea.
I know in Valley View, we're trying, Valley View, we're, and it's fairly reactive right now, trying to get proactive, just with the amount of THC offenses that's gone through the growth. But we work with Drug Free Idaho, but it's a punitive piece, it is left to the school and their parents go. Or we're trying to get into the older grades to get something started, some campaigns, because they've done it at the secondary level and it doesn't seem to be as productive, or parents aren't as engaged. So, yeah, we're trying to figure out how to get in with Drug Free Idaho to the younger grades. Yeah, it's crazy.
And is that middle school or?
Yeah, we're trying to,
Elementary or just?
well, we're trying to get into the pre-middle schools right now, and really one middle school. Trying to bring something on board, but I don't think
Yes, ma'am.
If I may, so I work with Northwest District Health, and I coordinate youth substance use prevention for the region. We have funding available to support prevention education in schools, and it's really a school capacity, case-by-case kind of situation, is my understanding throughout the district. So if that's something you're interested in talking about, we do have some funding available, and we can work with you. So I'll keep my card on.
Yes, sir. Yep. Absolutely. So the question is,